Good afternoon. I'm Karen Merrill, LCSW RBH provider, and I have the pleasure today of guiding you through the presentation on adapting to organizational change. Brenda Allen, our sales and marketing coordinator, is with me, and she'll be tallying the polling questions as we do that. So we're going to get started. So in the next 50 minutes or so, we're going to learn the typical responses to change in the workplace. We're going to review stress reactions, our health responses to change, take a look at the dynamics of change and why it's so dramatic for us oftentimes, and we're going to learn ways to handle change in a healthy way. There are some things in this training that you've probably heard before. It's not rocket science, but hopefully you'll be reminded and there'll be some things you'll be willing to try. So as is our practice, as I mentioned, we have polling questions throughout the training, a little more interactive, even though we don't see each other. And then at the end, hopefully there'll be some time if there's questions that you'd like to ask. So let's get started. So if we've worked in an organizational environment for the last, oh my gosh, we used to say, 5, 10 years, it's probably more like 15, 20. We've heard terms like mergers, acquisitions, reduction in force, or RIF, restructuring, changes in job title and responsibilities, change in direction and focus of employers' business plans. These are all factors that go into organizational change. And when we hear these terms, oftentimes we can wonder how it's going to affect us and what comes next. So what happens? There's an event, there's the change, then we can experience stress, and we'll be fleshing this out as we go along. And then we go through these phases during this kind of stress reaction phase until we get to what we call new beginnings, when we're on the road to the next phase of our organization. So we'll be talking about why these things affect us as the way they do. And although some people thrive and are energized on change, why most people dislike it is that it taps into this feeling that their lives are out of control, which they are, because in most cases the change is enacted on them. It disrupts our routine. It changes what we're used to doing, what we normally expect, things we're comfortable with. And then oftentimes we don't understand the rationale behind the change. And this is a place sometimes where people get stuck. They get so kind of caught up in why is this happening that they forget to move through the transition to get them to the other side. So we're going to talk about some approaches to change that cause us stress so that we can kind of understand and look for what to watch for before we get to some of the remedies. But, sometimes we can make a bad situation worse by attempting to cope with change by making these following mistakes. We can expect someone else will reduce our stress, that it's the job of our friends, our family, our environment to manage our stress. Deciding not to change, putting our feet in the sand and saying, nope, not me, I'm not going along with this new plan. We can act like a victim and feel like, why me? And pitting ourselves. Trying to play a new game by the old rules is something else that doesn't work effectively as we move through organizational change. And for those of us that have been in workplaces for a long time, shooting for a low-stress work setting is probably not realistic or something that's going to happen anytime soon. And we spend a lot of energy trying to control the uncontrollable oftentimes. Things that we have no control over, decisions that are made far above us, can be what we call a maladaptive approach to change. So, and remembering that all these things we talk about in terms of approaches to change are affected by our individual experiences, our background, and our personalities. So, we're working with people who are bringing all kinds of things into this picture. So we're going to jump right into the first polling question. So all of the following approaches to change can cause stress except, number one, trying to eliminate uncertainty. Number two, assuming management will reduce our stress. Number three, expecting differences of opinions among coworkers. 4, fearing the future. And 5, deciding not to change. So we're looking for the exception here, and we're going to give you a minute or two and then ask Brenda to tally the voting.
So it looks like we have 14% voting for 1, trying to eliminate uncertainty, and 86% of participants voting for 3, expecting differences of opinions among coworkers.
Perfect. That's exactly right. And as we go through, we'll see that that actually expecting differences of opinion, allowing that is something that won't cause stress, but in fact will lessen stress. Because as we said, we're all different, so we're all going to have different opinions. So good job on that one. So other approaches, choosing our own pace rather than kind of following the plan that's recommended. Here's our exception to the polling question. Expecting all others to agree with us. We've got a lot of different opinions and personalities out there. Slowing ourselves down, just taking it more slowly than the plan allows, can cause stress. Spending energy and frankly worry, brain power, fearing the future when we don't know what that future is going to hold as we manage through the transition. And then picking the wrong battles, which is actually an important thing to remember in all kinds of environments and relationships. But sometimes we can complain or worry about the little things and let the big things get away from us. So approaches that can cause us stress. More approaches that can hijack us. Psychologically unplugging from your job. In other words, I'm not invested in it anymore. I really don't care. Losing a stake. Avoiding new assignments. Not being agreeable or willing to take on new things. Trying to eliminate uncertainty and instability in areas of shifting tides. In all likelihood, our workplaces will continue to be shifting and experiencing change. So trying to eliminate that is only stressful. And then assuming that management should be the one that should hold our hand through this and keep us comfortable will only backfire on us and cause more stress. So kind of breaking this down or moving this a little bit forward, we look at 3 stages of change. And change wouldn't be stressful if it didn't ultimately mean that we're losing something to make way for something new. So change starts with an ending, right? I mean, there's a loss there. It's something is going to change for us, or we believe it will, and we believe that, you know, that's kind of a scary place to be, the beginning of the loss phase, or the endings. And then the next phase is what we call this neutral zone, which can be a kind of a period of shifting emotions and can last for a fair period of time. And this is all in preparation for seeing more clearly, or what we call the exploration or new beginnings phase. So right away, we've got polling question 2. This is a true or false question. This transition model of endings, neutral zone, and new beginnings are actually an abbreviated version of the Kubler-Ross grieving model that we're aware of in terms of what happens to us when we grieve a loss. So what's your thinking here, if whether or not this is a true or false statement? The polls are open, and you can begin to vote.
So I just closed the poll, and it looks like we have 93% of participants voting true and 7% voting false.
Okay, absolutely. It is true. So this is a what we call kind of an abbreviated version, and the classic phases of denial, anger, bargaining, and depression are all kind of contained in that neutral zone. But I think that the really kind of the point and the main key piece here is that it really is something that we grieve, whether we're aware of it or not, before we get to the acceptance phase. So talking about that first piece, the endings, there's many losses. You know, we can feel disenchanted that it's not supposed to be this way, or feeling off balance and almost disoriented. You know, who am I? Who am I going to be? And will I be able to do the task at hand when all the dust settles? Kind of then realizing that, you know, this really is ending, and there really are changes. So the endings come first, and then we get to what we call this neutral zone between the old and the new. It's a period, can be a period of numbness, where you're still kind of, you know, feeling numb to the reality of all the change that's coming ahead. It can be a phase where we minimize how we're going to be affected. We can feel anger at this phase, and loss and hurt. We can blame others. We can complain. We can feel stuck. The old hasn't been entirely released, and the new hasn't fully evolved. So it's a difficult and confusing time of intense and shifting emotions, and not necessarily linear, you know, at this phase, just like any grieving model. You can go from anxiety to depression to relief and anger. I think about this as kind of the visual for me as being in a boat in the middle of a big lake and not seeing either shore, and not knowing whether to turn back, thinking that's safety, or head to the other shore and getting to the new beginning. So this is the place where, you know, we experience the shifting ground, and as I say, can be the place that we stay the longest. Then how we sigh and we start to feel more clear and more focused about what's coming next. Preparation phase ends and action begins. That kind of temptation to turn back lessens, and we have more of a sense of a new direction, and new goals become clear. Our losses are replaced with some hope and feeling about what we may be gaining. And it's a time for reflection and for moving forward. Fact is, we're more open to understanding where we're going. During that neutral zone, we can be flooded with so many emotions that we literally can't think clearly. So this is a time where we begin to open up our thinking and be more hopeful. So another little word about some self-defeating responses to change. One is our mental attitude. You know, how are we thinking about this change? What does our internal tape tell us? What do we tell ourselves about this? What are our behaviors like? Is it making us crankier, or is it impacting how we react and behave in relationships? What are our verbal responses like? You know, how agreeable or disagreeable are we? The main point here is that if we allow change in the workplace to continue to negatively impact us, over time we can experience more fatigue, a sense of resignation, you know, a deepening sense of loss and control. So it's kind of things to kind of look out for. So also kind of a word for a moment in defense of resistance. You know, people always say you're so, you know, they can say you're resistant to change. You won't go along with change. Resistance kind of, you know, can equal negativity. Well, the fact of the matter is, resistance is a coping mechanism. It's actually a natural reaction to disruption, and something we do to protect us, to kind of, you know, gird ourselves up for what's coming. It's a fear of danger, pain, and uncertainty. And on a primitive level, we associate change with pain and the status quo with benefit. And there is, you know, we know what we know and what we're used to. And change can be scarier. So resistance is it's, as I say, a coping mechanism. What we don't want to do is get stuck there, stay in resistance while the rest of the world is moving forward, and it's just not productive. It's not helpful. So more on stress, because that's what organizational change and reorganization can do. So Webster tells us that stress actually is a mental or physical tension or strain. I feel, you know, I have my visual as kind of something pressing on you, pressing on the body, even pressing on us mentally, a sense of urgency causing it. So that's kind of a literal definition. And then what follows this is the stress response. We've heard of the stress response. We have the event, which is the change, that thing that we hear about. And then there's a specific set of physical changes, what I call kind of visceral reactions. Our muscles can tense up. We can experience anger and all these other things. this really occurs in reaction to our perception of that threat, what we tell ourselves, what it seems like in our brain. And in that, if we look at that kind of primitive definition, it prepares our body for running if possible or fighting if necessary. The fight or flight response, which we've heard about in stress management training. So you probably would be surprised to hear the term saber-toothed tiger in the good old days in the same sentence. But, in the old days, old days, organizational change moved at a much different pace. We heard about it as something happening in the future. We could plan for it. We could prepare for it. And once it was accomplished, you could take a breath, a sigh, and know that you'd be in that transition state for a period of time. Workplaces aren't like that anymore. Change comes rapidly. And so that caveman vision of the caveman and getting away from the saber-toothed tiger, for us now, that can look like deadlines. It can look like rapid change one after another. It can result in interpersonal conflict. So it's really that a threat comes in all shapes and sizes. And in fact, positive events, weddings, promotions, retirements, these cause change and then can cause a stress reaction too. So it's not all bad or it's not all in a negative light. It just helps us understand what we're dealing with. So, polling question 3. Do most workplace change events result in what we call a normal stress reaction or a traumatic stress reaction? So we'll give you a few minutes, or a couple minutes, and then Brenda will tally this up for us.
Okay, I've closed the poll, and we have 93% voting for normal stress reactions and 7% voting for traumatic stress reactions.
Yeah, again, right. Really, we think of traumatic stress as events beyond our normal experience, things that we witness, observe, or that really happen to us. So, I think about emergency response personnel, police, firemen, fire people, 911 operators, rescue crews, hospital workers, nurses, folks that repeatedly experience trauma that leads to strong emotional reactions. We call it PTSD, or visions that recur, thoughts that recur over and over again, and multiple symptoms these symptoms that persist over time interfere with how we enjoy our work and our home. Again, depending on what else is going on in our life, we can feel as if rapid change promotes traumatic stress. But for the most part, we're dealing with normal stress responses. So what are some strategies for getting through transitions? Well, let's start with the facts. Figure out what is actually changing. Look at the big picture and tie it back to details of everyday reality. Look at specifics rather than getting overwhelmed by generalities. Ask questions about that. Decide what is really over for you. What are you going to have to let go of? Specifically, what are you likely to lose? Is it your dream of what the future was going to look like under the current situations, assumptions you'd made, your self-image, your belief? What will be different for you specifically? Distinguish between these current losses or changes and old wounds. Some feelings are reactions to the present, and some are triggered by ghosts of the past that have never really been properly dealt with. So remind ourselves what was then and what is now. And if old wounds are coming up, it can be an opportunity to resolve those as well. So good to make that distinction. And identify the continuities. Not everything is ending. It is a piece of your life, but not the whole that is coming to an end. So protect or restore the parts of your life that aren't threatened by your current losses. For example, personal relationships, family relationships, what you do in your spare time, the kinds of pursuits that you enjoy. Continue with those things. And it's a time actually to cultivate them, to mitigate the stress. Self-awareness and self-care. Recognize those symptoms of the neutral zone. You may feel confused and lost. You may feel flat. These are all normal reactions. Taking time outs is important. Build yourself some quiet times and solid, safe places of retreat from the chaos of the emotion. Use that neutral zone as an opportunity to take stock at our priorities and see if they still make sense to us. Look at yourself creatively. Take a new view, possibly, of what you want, your desires, your abilities, your temperament, your resources. See where that leads you. Kind of open up this creative thinking. Consider the possibilities in a new light. Break out of that mindset, which everything is just the way it is. Needs to be, always has been, and always will. In other words, use this as an opportunity for growth. Experiment just a little every day, starting today, starting this afternoon. Transition time is not really a time in life for life and death decisions, but being open to new possibilities and behaviors can be really refreshing. Spending your lunchtime in a new way. Taking a different route to work seems simple and silly, but it just opens up what our senses experience. Move your desk around or rearrange your workstation for a new perspective. You might think of saying no to something you usually say yes to, just out of obligation. This coming weekend, you might try something you've never done before. And you might ask someone a question that you've never asked them before, or agree to something that you would normally not do, just to kind of stretch yourself. Taking a 3-minute break every hour is a really good use of your time. It can bring oxygen back to our brain as we kind of retool for the next part of our workday. So some things to experiment with. So what kind of symptoms can we expect? How do we know we're not coming down with the flu, we're just experiencing workplace change or life change? We can feel everything. You can feel physical symptoms, stomach ache, headache, cognitive confusion or disorientation, sleep problems, anxiety, fear, intense anger, apprehensive. You can think, what is happening to me? We can feel like we want to withdraw from relationships or be more social. And experiencing emotional outbursts. Those around us can give us feedback about what we're like to be around that doesn't feel like ourselves. We can lose our appetite. We can want to eat more. We can want to indulge in alcohol more. So really, all these things are ways to actually are reactions to what we go through on a day-to-day basis. So what can we do? We haven't gotten to this place in our lives without exposure to some information, if not a total program on relaxation training. So some of this will just be reminders, but we want to de-stress. We want to unstress ourselves. And something that we haven't talked about, or I haven't thought about in a long time, is that this kind of model of tense and relaxation. In early stress management trainings, we used to talk about progressive muscle relaxation, where at a time of stress, or certainly before we went to sleep at night, we would start with our toes and go all the way to our head and do tensing muscle groups in our body, traveling up our body, tensing as much as we can, and then releasing while watching our breathing. And it takes some time to do that in our whole body. And it certainly keeps our mind off our what's worrying us. And it also can really relax us for sleep and make us limp and ready to relax. Visualization is always a powerful, powerful method of relaxation. Putting in your mind's eye your most favorite soothing place. For me, it's the ocean and waves lapping on the shore, but it's different for all of us. So wherever that is, where you take a mini vacation and then kind of watch your breathing at the same time, can be really helpful. So daily tips. Practice relaxing at night before going to sleep. We've talked before about practicing gratefulness in other trainings, and it's very important, and can be an interesting ritual if before you go to sleep you identify those things that you're grateful for in that day that you've experienced and the day that's coming following the next day. And we can put this in practice for small pieces of gratefulness as well as big pieces. But it's a way of centering ourselves and helpful to remember. Consider what we call a free association journal. We used to talk about this too a lot, where you let yourself in an unfiltered way write about how you feel and then put it away, not read it every day, but go back and read it, at the end of a week or a couple of weeks to see if you see a pattern or consistency in what you're experiencing. Asking yourself before you go to sleep, clarifying value questions. When are you the happiest? What would you do if you could? What is your most important value? And how aligned is that value with the way we're living? So in other words, instead of just kind of getting caught up in life and letting it take us, we're more in control of what we do and how we manage ourselves. Something else that, of course, we've all heard over and over again, but taking care of our physical health, exercising at least 20 minutes. I think the kind of the rule of thumb is that we really get the best traction out of 30 minutes, but 20 minutes is great, at least 3 times a week. Getting enough sleep, trying to eat mindful, regular, well-balanced meals. And what's not on this list, but's very important, is drinking lots of water. We need to do that all the time, but during stressful times and times of transition, staying well hydrated, makes us feel a lot better. And drinking water instead of something else is really a way of taking care of yourself. Another word about exercise, that if we have some accountability, if we commit to someone else, we're more likely to stick to it. You know, habits are starting new things or continuing with practices that are helpful are all around practice, practice, practice. So if we commit to someone else, even if that someone else is our dog and we take them walking with us, that can be a part of getting into the habit of that. Rewarding ourselves. Do something today strictly for the pleasure of it. Keeping it healthy, of course, but oftentimes, when we go through rough periods, we correlate stress with that belief that I don't deserve something good unless I've earned it. And we can feel uncertain in times of transition, unsure of ourselves, and so feeling as if we've earned a reward doesn't quite sync with that kind of thinking. So rewarding ourselves just because we are who we are and that what we're going through deserves a reward is a nice way to look at that. So next polling question. All of the following are examples of healthy rewards except trip to the spa, dinner with friends, binge watching 3 or 4 times a week, a trip to the museum, or a movie. So Brenda's got the polling open, and we'll see what your thinking is about this one.
So this one, we have 100% voting for 3. TV
Yay.
binge watching 3 to 4 times a week.
Yeah, good job. Yeah, I think, in all full disclosure, I know I, for one, have, kind of watched one series a number of times, but I try to not do that more than one evening every once in a while. It certainly keeps your mind off other things, but it's not as stimulating or has as much long-term positive effect as other things that create more relationship interaction and actually stimulate us. So you've certainly got that one. Once in a while, it's okay, but if that's the MO for stress, then that's probably not a habit you want to cultivate. So a term we use is acting as if. Make a list of activities that you'd like to do, but reserve those activities for times when you've earned it. And be, kind of try to think creatively about this and act as if you deserve it. If today I'd gotten promoted or today were my birthday, what would I do? Then do it. Keep it healthy, but then go ahead and do it. In terms of keeping it healthy, we're going to talk about knowing our dysfunctional tendencies. We all have our vulnerabilities and soft spots when we get overloaded or overwhelmed, where we've gone. But knowing what those are and being mindful of that, avoiding alcohol and other drugs to kind of escape binge eating or purging, or making sure that we do eat is important, because if without food we don't have energy, and that's important. Avoiding cigarettes and other tobacco products, and we don't oftentimes include this, but also avoiding unhealthy relationships. We need to be mindful of what kind of energy is around us. So trying to seek out healthier relationships is important. Laughter in our busy lives, we forget about how powerful laughter is and what it can do to us. But it boosts our immune system. It decreases that stress hormone cortisol. It oxygenates our entire system. It's impossible to feel stress and have a good belly laugh at the same time. So it's a really good thing to try to find humor. What I really like, it stimulates both sides of our brain at the same time, which not a lot of things do that, but it helps improve our memory, our creativity, our ability to learn. Lowers blood sugar, creates opportunity to receive information because you think more openly. It increases the feel-good serotonin, that a chemical that we certainly need. Helps us cope, relaxes us. A laugh among friends builds rapport, repairs conflict. It helps shifts our perspective. So remembering to laugh, or even watching a silly movie, can be a really good coping mechanism. We also know that happy people believe themselves to be smarter. They believe themselves to be more likable. They believe they have more control over their life. They're more optimistic, and they have more positive expectations. So, smiling and keeping a sense of humor is really important to remember. We talk about how important it is for us to deal with our feelings and letting those feelings out. And it is. It's keeping things bottled up doesn't do us any good. It causes stress to our body and can make us sick. So dealing with our feelings by talking with a friend, using the EAP, talking with a counselor. We talked about keeping a journal, finding a creative outlet, drawing, painting, playing an instrument, writing, are all ways of dealing with our feelings. So our fifth polling question and our last polling question is, you need to believe you're significantly anxious or depressed to take advantage of the EAP. So let's look at this one and then see what you say.
Okay, I've closed the poll, and it looks like we have 94% voting for false.
Good. It's absolutely right. So the EAP can be used proactively, where you're starting to feel, a little different, having some trouble sleeping or whatever, and reaching out. And before, really a series of sleepless nights or depression, you're proactive. You can use the EAP as a sounding board, where you really are just wanting kind of somebody to listen, give some feedback. And you can use the EAP to set goals and make a plan for how to make some changes, whether it's in relationships, exercise, anything. So important to remember is that the EAP is free to you, it's confidential, and we make it as easy to access as possible, either talking to somebody on the phone or seeing somebody face to face. So, and to just kind of a word about, talk about what it is to deal with our feelings, but know when talking about them is really just spinning our wheels. When we get better and better about talking about it, but not really moving forward. So talking can make us feel better, or frankly, it can make us feel worse. We just get better at complaining about things. So if you're aware of how long ago the event was, and whether you feel the same or worse whenever you talk about it is a way of staying mindful about whether venting is really helpful or not. So as we head towards closing the presentation today, allowing others to help us, accept what's offered. If others can sense what you're experiencing, what you're going through, even asking specifically for what you need. People love to know how they can specifically help rather than generalities. Create a support system or cultivate the one you have, and trying not to lean on only one person. So accepting help takes practice. Compare your view of accepting help with your view of others accepting help. Act as if you were helping someone else, and start small. But we're not in this by ourselves, so take advantage and make others feel better by accepting their help. A final tip on a principle of effective change. What do we do that's working for us? What new things are we trying that seems to be working? Do more of that. What's not working? Then do something else and try something else until it works. Remember that the more we do it, the better it gets. So again, you've probably heard some things you've heard before, but hopefully it's reminders that open up your thinking to try things again. And so appreciate you choosing to take your time today to listen to the presentation. I know that Brenda's got a couple of handouts attached to the training that can be helpful on dealing with change and what is our assessment on readiness for change. So we have a few more minutes, and we're going to open it up just in case there were any questions that you'd like to ask or something that wasn't covered.
So it looks like we have one question.
Okay.
Okay. Can you say more about slowing down being something that causes stress? Most of the time, the advice I see is that when you're stressed out, you should slow down and be more accountable.
So I think that when you feel stress, slowing down and being mindful of what you're experiencing is very helpful. I think that what that kind of bullet point on that particular slide referred to is in terms of a work group or what's happening organizationally, that if you slow down when the pace around you is different, then it may end up causing you more stress. But your point is very well taken. I think if we're feeling stress, we first have to slow down, center ourselves, use those tools that we know is helpful, and then kind of get back on and try to work with what the timeline is that's expected of us. Anything else?
I don't see that we have any other questions at this time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So nothing wrong with the gift of time for the next little while, and maybe you'll actually think about some of the techniques we talked about today. So again, we appreciate you being here today, and talk to you next time. We'll close for now. Bye-bye.